Now, before anybody gets too excited, this giveaway did finish back in February, but I wanted to show you a good example of the lettering style that I'm taking you through today. Hello again team, it's Jess or JashiiCorrin, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to create this ribbon style lettering. So I call this ribbon style because, to me at least, it looks like somebody's taken a long piece of ribbon and twisted it and arranged it in such a way that they can make each of the letter forms and thus the overall word. I think this style of lettering looks really cool and it's actually not that difficult to achieve. So today I wanted to take you through step by step how to do it and also look over some of the ways you can make it your own. So to start off with, what we want to do is just make the base of our letter forms. To do this, I'm going to use my Tombow dual brush marker with the brush tip end. As a disclaimer, it is easier to do this style of lettering if you are using quite large letter forms, just because when we come to our outlining step, things can get a little bit fiddly if your letters are too small. To start off with our example, I'm just going to be doing the letter A. And you can see when I did this, I didn't try to thicken any of the downstrokes. I'm not going for calligraphy here. I did though make sure to hold my pen at a relatively consistent angle. So doing it a little bit slower this time, by going here. By holding your pen at a set angle, it means that the sections the ribbon twists in will be in the right place. Of course, I'm just doing an individual letter at the moment. You'd probably want to carry this through for an entire word. Once you have your base letter form down, or again if you're doing a full word, once you've written the entire word out, then what you want to do is go in and do the outlining. And it's the outline in particular that makes this lettering look like it's made from a ribbon. So for that I'm going to be using my Pitt Artist pen, just in the S size. So obviously you're going to want to do an outline of the entire letter, but anywhere your pen changed directions is a place where we're going to be having an overlap of the ribbon. So starting where I first put my pen down, which was here, I'm going to pretend that that section of the ribbon is the topmost section. So when I outline it, it's going to be sitting on top of anything else. So you can see I've just taken it from around the bottom here, and with that outline it now looks like that section of the letter is sitting on top of the part behind it. When I take this line to the top though, because this section of the letter is supposedly on top of everything else, instead of just finishing my outline where the pink part turns downwards here, I'm going to continue it up towards the top. So you can see it now seems like this piece curls over the top of this downstroke here. And I'm going to be doing a similar thing at any point where I had to change the direction my pen was traveling in. So that would be here, down the bottom here, over at the top here, and also down the bottom over here. If you're just starting out with this type of lettering, it can be good to imagine that each time you change the direction of your pen, you're changing whether the ribbon is on top or at the bottom. So if this section was on the top, then this section could be on the bottom, which means when we get to the next turn, this section would be at the top, which means that this part of the letter should be overlapping that part of the letter. So if this was to overlap this section, it means that the outline should come down along here and then cut across this pink part to show that that section was on top of that section. So I'll do that one now. So you can see I've cut across this section of the pink so that this part of the A looks like it's sitting over that part of the A. So going with that idea of alternating, so on top, on the bottom, on top, it means that this line should cut across to here, because the next section that comes down will be on the bottom again. And then as this section will be on the bottom, it means that this section here will be on the top. So this part will have to cut across. Of course, this letter form here was made just following that rule of interchanging between ribbon on top, ribbon on the bottom. But sometimes you may feel that after doing your on top and then on the bottom, it might just look better to have another section underneath that last one rather than on top. Of course, I also started this letter form assuming that this part of the ribbon was on top, but you may want to assume that that one's on the bottom. So if I do that to this letter form, if this first section of the A is on the bottom, it means that this section here that goes down will be on top, and we'll have to overlap on that side there. So you can see I've drawn my line across to make it look like this downward section is on top of that little section there. Also in this letter form, because I decided this part was on top first, I decided to draw that capping edge here, sitting on top of the part underneath it. But you may feel that that upward stroke being on top looks better, and I'll try doing that one here now. For this downward stroke, I'm also going to make it be on top of that upward stroke. So cutting across the pink, just there. On this one, I decided that the downward stroke of the A here was on the bottom, so I'd drawn both of these sections on top of it. For this one, I'm going to assume it to be on top. So I'll just draw a downward stroke here for the ribbon sitting on top. And then you see I've curved it across this section so it sits on top of the little tail here too. So that's the base letter form down and then the outlining done. The next step would be to add in a little bit of detail, just to really make it look three-dimensional. What I like to do is add small lines to indicate shadowing, and I do this anywhere my ribbon seems to overlap. When I put these lines in to indicate the shadow, I always make sure to put it on the ribbon piece that looks like it's on the bottom. So for the first letter form, that would be here, 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 and here. When putting these lines in, I just make them curve in the same direction the letter form would. So for here, this would curve upwards. For this one, it would come pretty much straight down. For this one, it'll curve upwards along this section of the ribbon. And for this one, it'll curve downwards. If you think that the black looks a little bit too harsh for the aesthetic that you're going with, you can also just use a pencil or a slightly darker shade of whatever color you put down. So going in with a pencil instead, again, anywhere that my ribbon overlaps, and always on the section of the ribbon that looks like it's on the underneath side. So that'll be here, there, here, and there. You can see that by using that pencil, these lines just look a little bit less harsh, so you have a much softer shadow compared to using the actual pen. Of course, when I put these detailing lines in, I use the same pen that I'd used for the outlining, so of course you can change to a finer tip pen to make them look a little bit more delicate. So of course this is how I do A, but what I'm going to do now is go and put in a few more letters just so you can see what each of them might look like. Just as I'd done with A, I go in first to draw the base letter forms, and here I'm using a Tombow dual brush marker, but really any rigid thicker tipped marker would work. One type of pen in particular that could be quite useful to practice with would be chisel-tipped highlighters, because they make the sections where the ribbon appears to twist and overlap onto itself really easy to spot. Also, when practicing, it can be helpful to use paper that, when you go over it more than once with your base colour, those sections are darker. This just makes it easier to see how one stroke of your base colour pen transitioned into the next, which kind of gives you guidelines for your overlapping. After the base letter forms are done, it's then in with the Pitt Artist pen for the outlining. For letters B through to I did the outlining in full, including the overlapping sections. But for J to T, I first only do the basic outline of each letter. I'll be coming back to these after the time lapse, just to talk about the fact that with each overlap, you need to choose which part is on top, and certain ways are going to look better than others. But for B to I finished these letters off by including the shadowing, and this is on the section of ribbon that's being overlapped with each twist. So you can see that for B through to I actually went in and put all the overlapping sections in. But for the remaining letters, I just wanted to show you that because with each turn of the pen you can decide either one section's on top or the other, you can get a lot of really different looking letter styles. And of course some of them you're going to like better than others. So for instance, I tend to prefer it that anywhere I have a long straight section, kind of like in G or H, or probably J, K, L, and then even maybe P and Q, I always prefer those longer straight sections to be on top. So technically, with the way that I usually like to do B, I'll usually have this long section down the side here be on top of the other parts of the letter. So I'll show you what I mean with J, just in pencil. So in J we have two sections where we have to decide what's overlapping what. We have a section here, and we also have the bottom of the letter here. So you can see with the way I've got it drawn in at the moment, we have this long section here be on top, but you could always switch these around so you have the longer section on the bottom and then this curving part be on top. Technically speaking, you could also do a little bit of both, and I'll show you what I mean. So let's just say we drew this section in as if the long part was on top, and then the bottom section as if the curve was on top. Which means that with how I have it currently, I'd be putting in shadows here, here, and here. As I mentioned, because my personal preference is to have any long sections being on the top, I would have preferentially decided to, instead of curve it through here, curve it the other way, so then the shadow would actually just be completely on the bottom section that comes off of the J. Having a look at K though, we have even more places that we have to make a decision. So drawing some of them in, we have this part here, the curve at the top. We have this part of the K here, so deciding whether the long section comes all the way down, or if this part that comes up is the part that's on top. We have a curve at the top of this part of the K. We also have this part here, which you can decide to curve inwards, and then this part at the bottom as well. So what is that, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 places to choose between, either having that section on top or the other section on top. So because I prefer to have the long sections on top, I'd put my lines here. I'd curve off the top here to really make that seem like it was on top. And because I want this part on top, I'll still keep coming down on this side. So this entire long section looks like it's on top. I'd curve off to this section here, out of that section there, and erasing the pencil lines so that it's a little bit less confusing to look at. So you can see that with the way that I've decided to draw mine, we have this part on the bottom, this part on top, that part underneath the long section but on top of the next curve, this part on top, and then that part on the bottom. So adding shadows. K is certainly one of the trickier letters, and it will take a little bit of practice to see what style you actually prefer in terms of which sections overlap which other sections. Some more straightforward letters though. L. I prefer again to have that long section on top. Also, just as a side tip for people who are starting out with this style of lettering, as I've done for J through to T, sometimes doing the outline first and then using a pencil to go in and map out where the overlapping section's in can be helpful for seeing what types of overlapping you do like and which ones you don't like. So if we look at the M, for instance, and let's just say I want to put overlaps here. So if I put all of my overlaps in here, and then I decided, actually, this one in particular I don't really like the look of. At least I've only gone in with pencil first, so I can erase the pencil and see how it looks the other way, and then make more of an informed decision. So I may decide that overlapping it this way I prefer much more. I may also decide that I want all of my overlaps in the same direction, so you can see an overlap goes across here, So maybe I want my overlap across here as well. And maybe I also want something similar for this one too. The nice part is that because I've gone and drawn in my overall outline ahead of time, it means that using the eraser doesn't affect this, but I can still more carefully plan out where I want each overlapping section to go. Also, as you'll have seen for this top line versus these other letters I've done, here I decided to, instead of using either the pencil or the pen to draw in the shadows, I went in for this one with the same colour of Tombow and just did another layer of colour. And for these ones here, I just used a shade darker. This can be useful if you wanted something a little bit more subtle than the black lines for this one, but still wanted to add some depth to your lettering. Going in and finishing off the rest of these though. Like any new skill you're trying to pick up, this lettering style does take a little bit of practice, but once you get the hang of it, it is actually really straightforward. As I mentioned, a couple of the things that can make your initial attempts more successful. 1. Try doing this with relatively large letters, as this makes your outlining a lot less fiddly. 2. Try using a chisel-tipped highlighter to do the base letters, as this makes the places that the ribbon twists in really obvious. 3. Working on paper that, when putting multiple layers of pen on, causes darker sections, can help as it essentially gives you outlines for the overlapping parts. 4. Sometimes doing the outermost outline in pen and then going over to do the overlapping sections in pencil can give you an impression of what your lettering is going to look like before you actually commit to overlapping one section over another. So far we've only looked at 1, individual letters, and 2, one colour. But at the start of this video, the example I showed you was multicoloured and a full word. So what I'm going to do now is turn over the page and show you how to achieve that one. So on this page here, I'm just going to take a light grey coloured Tombow, and I'll be using N95 for this. And the reason I'm using light grey is because I just want there to be an outline of where my letter forms are going to be, but my final lettering I'm not actually going to have it in the grey colour. Instead, once I've done all of my outlining, I'm then going to go and colour in each of the different sections that I have, but we'll talk more about that when I get to it. So the word I'm going to use for this example is hello, mostly because it's one of my favourite words to write, and it's something fairly nice to practice with. So as we've done before, first we go in and put down our base colour and just write out our letter forms. Remember, we're not trying to thicken any downstrokes, but we are trying to hold our pen at a consistent angle. So you can see that the colour from the Tombow is barely visible here, and that's exactly what I want. This is just supposed to be like a ghost of an outlining of your letters, so that again, once you've done all of your outlining, you can come back in here and colour these in. So jumping in now with my Pitt Artist pen to do that outlining. So just as I did on the previous page, here I've only gone around the very outside of the letters, just so I can more carefully think about where I want each section to overlap. Again, this would be a good opportunity to get your pencil out and have a look and see which are going to look better than others. A general rule though is anytime you're starting a new letter, I would draw on a line to make that section overlapping. So where the H meets the E I think should be overlapping there. Where the E meets the L, where the L meets the other L, and then where the L meets the O. If you're following the rule of one side up, one side down, then because this side is up, then that one should be down. So you could make it so that this part of the L is on top. As we spoke about, because I like my long sections to be on top anyway, I am going to make that so. And to make it overlap at the top as well. And I'll also just join the gap here. So again, we have those long sections that are sitting on top of the letter. I'm going to do a similar thing for the E, and also for the long section on the H. Now for all the other places we turn, so we have top here, the bottom here, and then this section of the O. Again, you could use your pencil to check if you prefer it one way or the other, but I'm just going to go and do mine with pen. Once you've got all those twists and folds drawn in, you can then choose to go in with those shadowing lines, or you could just go in with colour first. I'm going to put my lines down and then I'm going to colour my letter in. It's also good to mention here that I'm going quite quickly with how I'm drawing this out because I'm not actually using any of these letter forms for any proper titles in my journal. As with most things, if you take your time and make your letter forms carefully, the finished product is going to look really, really good. Now as we have all of the lettering outlined and we have those detailing lines in, it's time to go in with some colour. I'm going to use the same colours that I had from the example at the start of the video. And essentially what we're going to do here is that each subsequent section of ribbon gets coloured in with the next colour of the rainbow. So starting at the start, a very good place to start. The first section we have is this part that goes behind the H. And I don't consider these to be two separate sections, because really it is one continuous piece of ribbon there. So I'm going to colour both sides of it in with the pink. Following on from this, the next section should be orange. Next section will be yellow. So here in particular you can see why it was so important that we went in with that really light grey first. If we had have used a darker colour, laying yellow down over the top of that would kind of look a little bit not so good. The nice thing is that this is a really bright yellow and that grey is quite light, so the yellow still looks relatively vibrant when I put it down now. Next up we have green, so this section of the H that comes down. Blue, which I'm going to do for this small section here. Technically speaking, you could continue the blue through up to here as well if you wanted to, but I'm going to treat that as a new section. So for me that section will be purple, and then just repeating that pattern throughout the rest of the letters. If you'd followed that initial rule of one section on top, one section underneath, one section on top, one section underneath, then every section that was on top you could colour in one colour, and every section that was underneath you could colour in another. This would kind of make it look like you had a ribbon that was one colour on one side and another colour on the back. Of course, you can always make your lettering more decorative by adding gradients or patterns or highlights on top. But overall, once you get the hang of this lettering style, it's actually quite straightforward and can look really visually effective. I hope this video was informative and that you enjoyed watching. If you did like today's video, feel free to go check out another one, and until next time, bye!